Okay, today's video is on more grammar, and we're going to focus on two things today: numbers and plurals, plural nouns in particular. So let me get to the screen. Okay, so in your composition book, or you can follow along by watching this video, we're going to be using this page, hard and fast rules for using numbers. So this is a tricky one. I can't say that it's super easy, but it's just something that you kind of have to learn and know, and it's a good thing you have this composition book as a reference that you can always go back to if you need to know, how do I use numbers, or how do I spell out numbers? So here's the first rule. Number 1, spell out numbers that require only one word. Use numerals for numbers requiring more than one word. For example, spell out 9, 13, 20, and 50. And you notice they're spelled out because it requires only one word. Now, it says to use numerals for numbers such as 24, 51, and 100. If you were to spell them out, it would require more than one word, and that's why it's not spelled out. The same rule applies to ordinal numbers. So, you know what comes first or next. It says, my first kiss, the 5th house. And you notice the 22nd state is actually, they're actually using numbers, because you would have two words when you spell out the words 22nd. Okay, so that's rule number 1. Rule number 2, do not begin a sentence with a numeral. To avoid, do not spell out a long number. Instead, reword the sentence. So you wouldn't start out a sentence by saying 681 people were injured, or even spelling it out, 681 people were injured. What you should do is you should reword the sentence. So, for example, the number of people injured is 681. The third rule, spell out centuries and decades. Use numerals for years. And here are examples. So you would spell out 20th century. You would not write the number 20 for 20th century. You would spell out the 90s. You would not write 90s. And you would write 1987. Okay, number 4. Do not abbreviate units of measurement. Write out the word percent. So, for example, 4 inches and 22 inches. And you notice 22 is, they're using numbers, again referring to rule number 1. 22 requires you to write out 2 words, and that's why they're using numbers instead of letters. 15% and 85%. And you notice they're not using that 0/0 symbol for percent, but they're spelling it out. Okay. Number 5, when two numbers are next to each other, write out the word with fewer letters, or write out the first number. For example, I babysat 3 2-year-olds. Another example, the store has 25 32-inch televisions. Number 6, be consistent with the same sentence with the same types of numbers, even if you have to break rule number 1. So here's an incorrect one. It says, I have 23 volleyballs and only 6 basketballs. So you notice that, you know, one uses numbers, and the other one is the other use of the number is they're spelling it out. So what you would rather do instead is you would keep the format consistent. So you would write instead, I have 23 volleyballs and only 6 basketballs. And you notice that this breaks rule number 1 because because 6 is just a one word, would be spelt with just one word, but to keep it consistent, you would have to break rule number 1 in this case. Okay, so on the next slide, what you're going to do is you're going to practice. Now, I know there are a lot of rules for numbers, but you're going to practice. It says each sentence below contains mistakes. Use your hard and fast rule sheet to identify the mistakes and correct them in the space below. So let's look at example number 1. Many wars took place during the 20th century. And we corrected it right here in the purple. Many wars took place during the 20th century. Remember, certain centuries are spelt out. We don't use numbers. Okay? So I want you to practice typing in the correct answers in the purple boxes for numbers 2 till number 6. And the next slide that I'm going to talk about is hard and fast rules for making plural nouns. Now, English is a tricky language. There's a lot of rules, especially with spelling, not just with speaking. And here are some examples. When we want to change nouns into plurals, there's rules in regards to their spelling. So here's rule number 1. If a noun ends with an S, a CH, an SH, X, or an S, then it says, then we add an ES. So here are some examples. Bus. Do you see it ends with an S? And so we're just going to add an ES. Buses. Here's crash. To make this plural, it ends with an SH. We're going to add an ES. Okay? And the same goes for all of these other examples. Here's rule number 2. If a noun ends with a consonant plus a Y, you would change the Y to an I, then add ES. So let's look at one example. Baby. Baby is spelled B-A-B-Y. So the consonant is a B, and the Y, it ends with a Y, baby. To change it to a plural noun, it says change the Y to an I, which we did here, and add an IES. So therefore, the plural noun of baby is babies. B-A-B-I-E-S. And here are other examples of the same rule. Consonant plus a Y. Duties, families, batteries, histories, and memories. Rule number 3. If the noun ends with a vowel first and then a Y, you would add an S. So here's an example. Joys. So joy, it ends with a Y, but the letter that precedes the Y is a vowel. It's an O. Okay, so it says if there's a vowel plus a Y, which this is, an O and a Y, all you do to make it a plural noun is to add an S. Joys, J-O-Y-S. Here's another example. Essays. It ends with a Y, and the letter that precedes the Y is a vowel. It's an A. And so all we do to make it a plural noun is add an S. Essays. Rule number 4. If a noun ends with an F or an FE, then add an S or change the F to a V, then you would add an ES. Okay, that's a lot. So let's take a look at some examples. Giraffe. Okay, giraffe ends with an FE. So then we add an S to make it a plural noun. Giraffes. Cliffs, on the other hand, ends with just an F. And so what we do is we add an S to make it cliffs. Now here's the next example. So a knife. Okay, it ends with an F-E. K-N-I-F-E. So in this case, we would change the F to a V, then add an ES. Okay. Here's another example. Wolf ends with an F. We change the F to a V and add an ES. And I know this is a lot of rules, but I'll give you a tip. Good readers also make good spellers because they see the words spelt many, many times. So read and read a lot, and these spelling rules will come naturally to you. Number 5. Okay, so if there's a consonant and an O, you would add an ES. So here's an example. 0. The R is the consonant and an O. 0. You would add an ES. And same for tomatoes. Step number 6 is if the word ends in a US, which is a us sound. It's Latin in origin. So you would change the S to an I. For example, alumnus, the US at the end, us, is Latin in origin. You would change it to an I, alumni. Fungus, the plural would be fungi. Okay, and here are some common irregular plurals. Again, these irregular plurals don't fit into any of these categories up above. And same with these nouns. They don't fall into any of these rows 1 to 6. But as English speakers and English writers, these are just some things that we have to know. So irregular plurals would be men, women, children. They're already plurals, so you can't change them to plurals. And some nouns don't change. Okay, so for example, fish or deer, you don't say deers. Deer is already a plural, and so on. Okay. What you're going to do next is you're going to practice writing out. It says for each noun on the left, write its plural form on the right. So go ahead and take a look at kiss. How would you, looking at the rules on the page prior, how would you change kiss to a plural noun? And toy, thesaurus, library, and so on. So go ahead and type in these boxes, and tomorrow your teacher will be sharing with you the correct answers. Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.